Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi Bava Batra 1 week at a time. This is our 9th class, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 58 to 64. So we were in the middle of speaking about Rav Bana, and we're going to have a few stories about him. So he would actually walk around marking graves. In those days, not everybody marked the graves, and we know that you have to be very careful so as to know exactly where there is a grave. And he got to Ma'arat HaMachpelah, the cave of the patriarchs in Hebron, and he sees Eliyahu Hanavi, right? Sorry, not yet. Sorry. He sees Eliezer. Eliezer was Abraham's servant, and he sees him standing outside. Of course, this is more spiritual, I don't think physical, and he doesn't really want to let him in to mark the grave. But Abraham calls and says, it's okay, he can come in. Again, Abraham is very dead, but he calls and he says, it's okay, because Rav Bana is a very holy person, and he'll realize that he's seeing the patriarchs, and he will be very respectful. So he starts measuring the cave. And then a divine heavenly voice comes out and says, you saw my image in Yaakov, but you can't see Adam. Now, if you remember, the Midrash tells us that there are 4 couples buried in Ma'arat HaMachpelah, Adam and Chava, and then the 3 patriarchs and their wives, meaning Yaakov is with Leah. So this divine voice says that that you could see Yaakov, but you can't see Adam. And what does that mean? That and we'll see in a second that Adam was like the most beautiful person on earth. The patriarchs were also very handsome, but Adam is like the most beautiful. And then the Gemara tells us, and then this voice says, you don't need to measure Adam, right? Adam's grave, because it's the same measurement as the other graves. And from here, there's a machloket of how to understand the cave of the patriarchs. Was it that it was 2 and it's a double cave, right? In Hebrew, it's called Ma'arat HaMachpelah, meaning double. So the question is, double, does it mean because it's like husband and wife, or does it mean that the crypts were double? What does that mean? Either there was an inner one and an outer one, or an upper one and a lower one. But either way, the Gemara tells us that they were parallel. So if you measure one, you don't need to measure the other. And then the Gemara says, right, that Chava, Eve, was the most beautiful person ever. So too Adam, right? They were both like extremely beautiful, and everyone else you can't even compare. That's how beautiful they were. Okay. Then there's another story, since we're speaking about measuring graves. So it seems that the corpse of Tuvi bar Masna, again, he is a corpse, so he's dead, but this magician walks by, and it seems that he was, this magician was, or sorcerer, he was digging up bodies to take their clothing. So when he passed by this Tuvi's grave, he like sticks his arm out of the grave, and he holds him by his beard. But then eventually he lets him go. And the idea was to scare him, to make him stop doing this. But the next year, apparently it happens again. And this time he does not let go of him. And they actually need to cut him loose. So I guess if you're looking for any scary ghost stories, this is a good daf for you. Since we're talking about Rav Bina, we continue with Rav Bina. He interpreted what a man said on his deathbed for his sons. It seems the father was leaving certain things to his sons, but he said it in a very cryptic way. You get a barrel of earth and a barrel of bones and a barrel of cotton. And then Rav Bina said, no, a barrel of earth means you get the field. A barrel of bones means this son gets the animals, and a barrel of cotton means you get all the quilts and the sheets and the blankets. So you see that he was very smart. Another story of Rav Bina, he discovered which of a man's sons was really his son. Apparently, there were a whole bunch of illegitimate children, and then one true son. And basically, he tells them like to bang on their father's grave, and right, the illegitimate children would be brazen enough to bang on the father's grave, but not the real son. So that's how he figured out who it was, and then he gave the whole estate to the real son. And then these brothers were not very happy, so they got Rav Bina arrested by the local government, but then his wife got him out. The government realized that he was very smart. She convinced him that he was very smart, and he was released. And the last thing before the Mishnah, the Gemara tells us that wine prevents a person from getting sick. However, if you're already sick, don't drink wine. Actually, go to a doctor and get medicine. Okay. The next Mishnah on Daf 58. If you remember, we were talking about making a Chazaka on. We were talking first about a house and a field. Now we're going to talk about on items. So the Mishnah tells us you cannot make a Chazaka. Again, what does it mean to make a Chazaka? You're saying this item is mine. Again, even though I don't have the receipt that I bought it, right? The fact that I'm using this item means that it's mine. Okay, so the Mishnah tells us you can't make a chazaka on a drain spout, right? Again, we're going to see it's attached to the gutter. So it's like this, the drain from the roof, but its place can make a chazaka. The place that it's in, the Gemara is going to explain it, but the place is permanent. The drain spout is not permanent. And you can make a chazaka on a gutter. Again, right, the actual pipe that is draining the water from the roof. You cannot make a chazaka on this on a certain type of ladder. It was called an Egyptian ladder because it's not permanent. But the Tyrian ladder is permanent, therefore you can make a chazaka on it. You can't make a chazaka on an Egyptian window because it was very small and not permanent, but this Tyrian window you can. And now the Gemara is going to explain. So the Gemara tells us that a person, what was this drain spout? A person can place the spout somewhere onto his neighbor's property, but the neighbor can tell him to move it to another place, right? So I actually have that, like I live in an apartment. The upstairs balcony has like a drain spout. I don't know if you know, but in Israel, the way they wash the floors, it's not really with a mop. You actually take water and then you with like a squeegee, you move the water out a drain and then it goes out of the house. Or you have like a drain in the floor. So my upstairs neighbor, I hope she can't hear me, but my upstairs neighbor, her drain spout goes like right into, right, she's upstairs and I'm on the main floor. So it goes right into like the floor, right in front of my front door. Now it needs to drain somewhere, right? So I can't say you can't drain your floor, but I can say, listen, you have to move it over a little bit so it's not, let's say ruining my front yard or something like that. But I have to let her drain it into my property because what else is she going to do? Right? So that's what the Gemara is saying, that the spout, because it's movable, then the neighbor, downstairs or next door can say you need to move it, to another place. Or another opinion is that the neighbor can tell him to shorten the gutter, but not to get rid of it. Again, right? You need to be able to drain your apartment, so he can't make you get rid of the drain pipe. Another option is the neighbor can build something under the spout, right? So if I was smart, Aliza would love this, right? Because she likes to plant things. So I really should put a plant underneath that spout. That would be smart. Okay, I have to think about that. Right, so you can build underneath the spout, but you can't make them move it because, again, as we said, you need the spout. Okay, daf 59. We said that you can make a chazaka on a gutter. So what is this gutter? So the Gemara explains that the gutter was made out of stone, right? It's not like a little metal pipe, but it was like a stone, I guess like waterway to allow drainage of the roof or of the apartment. Therefore, if you build something there, you're going to ruin it. But again, you can't prevent your neighbor from building these kinds of things. As we said, they have to be able to drain their property. Okay, let's say you have a pipe that goes from Reuven's roof onto Shimon's property. Okay, right? So it's like it's going down. Reuven, again, he's the roof owner. He can't close let's say it's been there for a long time, right? So let's say I decide, I just had a great idea. I'll put a plant underneath the drain pipe. My upstairs neighbor now isn't allowed to move the drain pipe because I put this plant there so that it can be watered, right? So Reuven is not allowed to close the drain to prevent the water from going into Shimon's land. Again, the idea here is once you establish that this is what our property is going to look like, you can't just change it without, again, either some sort of compensation or saying that you're going to change it. Okay, let's go to the ladders. So the Gemara explains that the Egyptian ladder was very small, right? We would probably call it maybe a step stool. It had less than 4 rungs. Therefore, again, right, its place or it itself is not permanent because it's movable, right? Just because I use a step stool doesn't mean that I own it or that it's mine, or that area where it is now its permanent home. Now, what's the Egyptian window? It's lower than 4 amot. So again, if it is lower than 4 amot, you can make a chazaka, and you can say, I don't want you opening up a window into my property. And now the Gemara explains the different scenarios. Let's say Reuven has a window and Shimon wants to build something in front of the window and block it. Again, we're talking about neighbors, right? So you can think about, right, your backyard, or right, 2 houses that are next to each other, right? You can't build something that's going to block the window. Again, the Reuven, right, the one who owns the window, can protest. Or if Shimon wants to make a window, right? Again, let's say it's 2 houses facing each other. One has a window and one had a wall, right? So that's fine because the window guy isn't looking into the wall guy's house because he can't see. But let's say now the wall guy, right, Shimon, wants to open up a window. So he, right, now Reuven's going to be upset, right? Because let's say he says, my bedroom window was here and I don't have any shades and I want to keep it open. You can't open a window across from my bedroom window. So if Shimon wants to make a window, Reuven can protest and say, I don't want you looking into my property, right? That's not okay. Let's say the window is higher than 4 amot. So then, because that's high in those days, you don't have a chazaka, and you can't protest if the neighbor wants to build something opposite that because it's much higher. Or no, you can always protest, and your neighbor's not allowed to build something opposite the window. And here the Gemara tells us that you can force a person to not act like the people of Sodom, of Sodom, right? Sodom and Gomorrah, right? A place where people were very immoral. So you can force someone to not behave that way, right? To basically the opposite, right? You can force someone to behave properly. Okay. If you're opening window to bring in light, so then that is something that's permanent, and therefore you can make a chazaka on that area, and it becomes, your right to the light that you're bringing in. Okay, next Mishnah. Here we're going to talk about a ziz. A ziz in Hebrew means a protrusion, something that protruded from the wall or from a house. Now, if it's at least a tefach, you can make a chazaka on this, right? So it could be that you have like a little beam that hangs off of the roof of your house, and you use it to hang your plants, right? So I can't come along and say, I want to hang my plant on that, right, on that beam, right? It's in my airspace. You can say, what do you mean? It's mine, right? So whose is it? So whoever, again, has the right to it, they can create a chazaka, and now the other person does not have the right to it and can protest if somebody comes and tries to use it. However, if it's less than a tefach, it's seen as, right, not really something of importance. Therefore, you don't have any rights, and somebody else doesn't have any rights to it. Okay, so now the Gemara explains. Again, let's say you have a beam that sticks out 4 tefachim into the property, and it's 1 tefach wide. So so let's say it's right, your house, and it goes over into your neighbor's property. If the neighbor didn't protest, so then he can, even the other person, and we said it was narrow and long, right? So if the neighbor doesn't say anything, the owner can now make it instead of again, a tefach is a hand breadth, right? So it's like a fist. So it's like a fist, and then it's 4 fists wide, long. So the Gemara says, if the neighbor didn't say anything and it's already there, you can now widen the beam to 4 tefachim, right? Meaning it was 1 by 4. You can now make it 4 by 4 because the neighbor didn't say anything when you put it up. Okay, now if the beam is less than a tefach, right, less than 1, right, like a fifth, so then you do not make a chazaka on it. And now again, the question is, what are we discussing, right? Are we discussing the concept of, we saw this in the beginning of the Masechet, called hezek ri'iyah. Hezek from the word nezek. Nezek is damage. Ri'iyah as in lirot, to see. And here the discussion is being able to see, right, into somebody else's property, is that seen as damage, right? We know when we learned in Masechet Bava Kama, we talked about damage as you break something, you lose something, right, something dies, that's damage. But if I can look into your backyard or your bedroom, is that seen as nezek? Am I doing damage to you? Right? So some say that let's say you have this beam, maybe you're going to lean over the beam and look into the other person's property, right? And is that damage or not? So the Gemara says, wait a minute, everybody agrees that looking into someone's property is called damage. That's not okay. But here we're talking about something that's smaller than a tefach. If it's smaller than a tefach, again, what are you going to use it for? You can't climb on it. It's small, but maybe you can use it as a hook, right? So maybe you can hang something on it. But again, are you going to look into the property based on this little piece of beam? Probably not. Okay, next Mishnah. Okay, remember we were talking about, right, two houses, one next to the other. So we say that you cannot open a window into somebody else's property, or sorry, into jointly owned property, right? So if you have a chatzer, a courtyard, and again, let's say there are a few doors on the courtyard, you can't now break down your wall and make a huge bay window, because the neighbor can say, wait a minute, I had a certain amount of privacy in this courtyard. Again, they're doors, but you had a little window and now you want to open it into a big window. I don't want you doing that. So you're not allowed to do that. If you bought another house in another courtyard, so you can't open, right? You can't open a door from your house now into the other courtyard. Again, what's the idea here? We're talking about again, we're talking about opening windows, but the idea is you're taking up a semi-private place and you're opening it up so that you can see more. And if that's the case, again, as we said, that's seen as here it's not necessarily damage, but you're changing the reality or the dynamics of the courtyard. And you're not allowed to do that. Again, if you ask permission, you're allowed to do it. But if you don't ask permission, so then you're not allowed to do it. It's actually interesting now that I'm saying this out loud, because I live on a yishuv, which is, I don't know, less than a town. So I don't know what that would be called in English, a community. But because things are, again, it's not a kibbutz, it's not everything, it's not communal living, but but the idea is, right, if I want to do construction in my house, I actually have to get permission from my neighbors to do construction, right? Because again, I'm changing the dynamics of our living. Yeah, I like village. Eliza says village. I like that. Because, right, again, when you live in a close-knit community, any change that I make, again, not necessarily on the inside, but anything that affects the outside, I'm not only talking about zoning laws, right? Because in a city you have zoning laws, but here we're talking about also in terms of, my relationship with my neighbors. It's very important to maintain those relationships. The Mishnah continues at the bottom of 59. If you build a second floor, again, you can't open it into the courtyard as a separate entrance, because you're, again, creating more openings into a closed area. So now the Gemara explains, right, again, you can't open the window into your friend's courtyard, but right, again, even if you share the courtyard, we said, again, hezek re'iyah, you're adding more, I guess, visibility to the area. And again, a person can say, I don't want you looking into my windows. Okay, Daf 60. What about closing up windows? Again, let's say you close up a window and or you block a window. If the other owner doesn't say anything right away, right? So if they don't protest, so then it seems that he says it's fine, or he didn't say, but by not protesting, the neighbor saying it's okay with him, and then you can leave it the way it is. You're also, the Gemara explains that our Mishnah was saying you're not allowed to increase foot traffic from one courtyard to another. Okay, now you can divide the inside of your house into two rooms, but again, you can't add another separate apartment into your house, because now again you're bringing new people into your courtyard, and that's not fair. Like I remember again in our community, they built like I live in a place where there are very few apartment buildings, and all of a sudden they built an apartment building, and all the neighbors said, "Wait a minute, how are you building an apartment building? There's no parking for right. There's no parking on the street for 10 more families to live on the street." So they actually had to raise the apartment building to make we don't have underground, but like the entrance, right? The first floor is parking, and then the apartments start on the second floor because, right, the neighbor said you're going to take away all of our parking spots. So the same thing in the Chatzer. Again, the courtyard was, I don't know if I want. I'll say shared living space. Um, so I don't want more people to be sharing my living space if that's not what I signed up for, right? If there were 3 houses and you decide to now make, 3 extra apartments in your house, that's not fair. So that's what the Gemara is speaking about. Okay, next Mishnah. You cannot open up a doorway opposite another doorway in, again, in a jointly owned courtyard. Again, this is a loss of privacy, the same thing as the windows. Again, or a window opposite another window. You cannot enlarge an existing window. Again, all of this is without permission. Obviously, if you ask permission, you can do it, but you can't just decide that this is what you want to do. And also, you can't take one window and make it into 2 separate windows. Again, it seems you're taking away the privacy of the area. You can open a doorway or a window into the public domain, into Reshut HaRabim. Obviously, there are people walking there all the time, so more windows into a public area is fine, right? Even if it's opposite another door or window, right? Let's say across the street, that doesn't matter again because there's a street in between. And again, you can enlarge a window or make it into 2 if it opens up into the public domain, Reshut HaRabim, but not a courtyard. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain, and this connects to the Parshat Shavua, which was a few weeks ago when we in Parshat Balak, when we have Bil'am, right, who wants to try to curse the Jewish people, and he says the very famous line, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael, right? How great are the tents of Jacob. And Rashi explains over there what did he see that was so great about the tent? And Rashi explains that the doorways of the tents, right, did not open up opposite each other. Rather, they opened up, to a wall, right? Meaning, Bnei Israel were very modest people. So when they pitched their tents, they did so in a modest way, right? There were no doors opposite each other. And therefore we were worthy, the Jewish people were worthy of God resting among them, right? So our Gemara, again, which I think is just amazing, right? Our houses and our, the Jewish law, maybe we'll say the Jewish zoning laws are based on the stories from the Torah, right? So the Jewish people in the desert were very modest, so too we should be very modest. Okay, we said that you can't widen a doorway. Again, why would that be an issue? You would think that if the doorway is there, the doorway is there. But again, if you remember, we learned, I want to say it was earlier in this Masechet, that every doorway in the courtyard gets a certain amount of land or rights to the courtyard. If you remember, right, you get 4 amot for every doorway that you have. Therefore, if you widen your doorway or you make it into 2, you're now going to get more land or more rights to the courtyard itself, right? Or maybe the issue is that the neighbor can say, I preferred when you had a small doorway because when I was hanging my laundry, I could wear pajamas because you couldn't see me. But if you now build a huge bay window or a big double door, now you're going to be able to see me in my pajamas, and I don't want you to see me in my pajamas. Okay. You could say get dressed, but it's my backyard or front yard. So, okay. All right. Next, the Gemara says, wait a minute. What if the door was 4 amot and I split it into two? Right. Again, if I split it into two, so then you would get, remember, 4 amot and 4 amot. That's not okay. But let's say the doorway was 8 amot. So I was already getting 8 and I just split it into two. That doesn't change my rights to the amount of land in the courtyard. So maybe I can do that. And again, we said no, because again, 2 doors is like less privacy than 1 door. And therefore the neighbor can say, I don't want you to do that. And again, as we said, you can do anything that opens into the public domain because anyway, the public can look in. So what does it matter if you're doing more? Okay, next. The next Mishnah, you are not allowed to dig a pit under or in the public domain. Or you can, as long as, again, what's the idea? You're building, let's say, a cistern, and you're going to cover it with a pothole, right? With a, what's it called? A pot, what's it called? A cover. Anyway, the cover, pothole cover. Right, so in those days, I see people typing, thank you. Right, so in those days, it would be made out of wood. So what we were concerned that the wood is going to rot, someone's going to, walk on it, and it's going to break. So the first opinion is, manhole, thank you, manhole cover. So you can, again, the first opinion is you can do this and cover it well. And look, if in 2 years from now it's going to get rotten, that's not my fault right now, right? Maybe you should check it and upkeep, but you can do it. Our second opinion is no, you can't do it because you're not going to see it rotting from underneath and someone is going to get very hurt. Okay. Next, the Mishnah says you can't extend a ledge or a balcony over the public domain, the Reshut HaRabim. Again, we're scared someone might bang into it. If someone's riding by on a horse, they can get hurt. You can move. So what should you do? Let's say you want to make a balcony. You move your property in a little bit, and then you make a balcony that goes to the edge of your property. If a person bought the courtyard, you get rights to all the balconies that hang into the public domain, and the Gemara is going to explain. Okay, so now the sages say you cannot dig a pit again because the cover can get rotten, and then people might fall in, and they won't know that it's rotten. The other opinion is right now you're making it safe, so it is okay. Rabbi Ami had a ledge that stuck out into an alleyway. And then another person had this like a ledge that hung into the public domain. So basically he said it's different if it's in an alleyway or in the public domain. So he actually cut it. So that person had to cut down his ledge. But the other one who was over the alley didn't have to, because again, an alleyway, not a lot of people walk by, and therefore it's not necessarily an issue, but in a public domain, it is an issue. Let's say you have a tree leaning over into the public domain. You need to trim it, right? You don't have to cut it down, but you need to trim it. Initially, they thought, okay, you just trim it so that people can walk underneath it. It's nice, there's shade. But then they said, no, it's not good. You actually have to, cut down further up. If a person set his wall back so that he can make a ledge, then that's okay. But let's say they didn't. Can he let's say in the end, he didn't build the ledge. Can he put the wall back where it was? Right. So one could say that the public got used to this extra space, and therefore they would walk through that like extra area, and now it becomes part of the public domain, and you cannot extend your wall back to that area. Let's say you bought again, we said the chatzer, a courtyard, and there were ledges there or balconies, and then they fell down. So you can rebuild it exactly the way it was. But if it covered, but if it was covered, if the area was covered in lime or it was painted and then it fell down, you can't redo it. The question is why? Why can you not redo the plaster or the paint? And the Gemara explains that the idea was that because the temple was destroyed, we want to make sure that we remember that the loss of the temple, right? In Hebrew, we call it zecher lechurban, a remembrance for the destruction of the temple. And therefore, you should not repaint the area like if it fell down. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, you can't, right? You can paint your house, but maybe it should be a little bit duller, right? Maybe mix some sand in it, or maybe just you should leave a little portion, right? So a lot of houses, definitely in Israel, I'm not sure outside of Israel, like leave a little area by their door that's unpainted or unfinished, and that is to remember that we still don't have the temple. And from here, the Gemara tells a story that after the destruction of the temple, there were a lot of ascetics, right? People who wanted to not partake in the material world. So they said, right, we're not going to eat bread, and we're not going to eat meat, and we're not going to eat wine, because that's what they used in the temple, right? The sacrifices and the wine, right? Which is actually what we do in the 9 days, right? We don't eat meat or drink wine, but they wanted to do it all year long. But then they said to them, wait a minute, if you're not going to eat meat and wine, maybe you shouldn't eat bread, right? Because they also had bread offerings, right? You shouldn't have fruit because of the bikurim. You shouldn't drink water because they used to put water on the altar on Sukkot. And then they were like, oh, yeah, actually, you're right. You can't really live this way. So they needed to figure out how to properly mourn the temple, but also, live in this world, right? So the Gemara tells us you can't mourn excessively. It's too hard for the people. And therefore, as I said, you should leave a small space, a small like square, an amma by an amma in your house that's either unplastered or unfinished. Again, you can make a feast, you can have celebrations, but take one thing, off the menu. And here the Gemara talks about the idea, right? The verse, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim, right? If I forget Jerusalem, right? Let me, right? I'll forget like my right arm and my tongue, right? So this is the Gemara says that our desire is for Jerusalem, and again, we can't always be sad. However, we have to remember, even in our happiest times, that Jerusalem was destroyed, right? And from here, the custom is that at a wedding, you actually put a little bit, some ashes on the groom's head, very little, you don't really see it. And that is why, right, we break the glass at the wedding, right? And we sing the song, or we say the verse, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim, meaning even at a moment of our highest joy, we have to remember that we are still, in exile, and we still do not have the temple. And the flip side of that is the Gemara tells us that if you properly mourn Jerusalem, you'll be part of rejoicing for Jerusalem afterwards. With that, right, the end of the chapter, it says that the Romans didn't allow the Jews to do Brit Milah, or to gather for the Brit. So then the people said, maybe we shouldn't get married and we shouldn't have children. And the Gemara says, no, that's not our response. And that actually really makes me think about nowadays, we're in the middle of a war, and a lot of people asked, right, should we get married? What do we do? There's a war going on. And the rabbi said, no, right? This is exactly the same. It's not the same thing, but the similar idea that even when things are hard, we celebrate the things that we're supposed to celebrate, right? Jewish marriage and children, and that's something that we need to continue doing. Okay, that is the end of the third chapter. The next chapter, we are going to be discussing buying and selling things, particularly houses and fields. And the question is, what is included in the sale? Okay, so the Mishnah tells us on Daf 61, if you sell a house, the annex isn't included. Even though it opens into the house, it's seen as almost a separate apartment, and therefore it is not included. If you have a separate house that's inside the house that you sold, it's also not included. If you, on the roof, have a fence that's 10 tfachim high, then the roof area is also not included. Or if it's less than 10 tfachim, but it has a doorway, then again, it is also not included. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so the question is, what are we talking about? Right, so again, here it seems that it's not clear from the documentation what a person meant to sell or not, right? So the Gemara tells us that if there's an annex, it must be at least 4 amot square, and if it's that size, so then it's not included in the sale of the house. But if it's smaller, it is included in the sale because it's not seen as important. Let's say you have a cistern or a pit, on the property, so that also is not included. Again, this has a different purpose, therefore it can even be smaller than 4 amot, and it's not included in the sale of the house. If you marked the outside boundaries of the house, even if it seemed to include the annex, it doesn't include it, right? If, 1 second. If you refer to an apartment as the house, right? So then you only bought the apartment and not the whole building, right? Let's say a person wrote, I didn't withhold anything, right? I sold you the whole house. So you sell the whole building, and it includes everything that's part of the building. If you sold a field in a valley, you only sell the field, you only really sold the field and not the whole valley. Again, you need to be very clear in a sales document what you're selling and what you're not selling. Let's say you have 2 plots that have the same name. If you wrote, I'm selling you my lands, so then you sold both of them. If you just wrote land, so then it's only one of them, right? And if you wrote property, so that includes the land and the house and the slaves as well. Okay, now we have a lot of pictures. So hold on 1 second. Okay, so here is the case, Daf 62. A person bought a field and they were told that one side has a long side and the other one has a short side. So he only gets the field corresponding to the short side, right? So let's say he says, I'm selling you the field that is bordered by Levi, right? That's the blue one, and Ruvain. So we say, oh, Levi and Ruvain, it must be that you only get the dotted area. So you only get the rectangle. The Gemara says, wait a minute, why don't I get the triangle? Well, that's not really a triangle, but whatever that is, trapezoid, right? Why don't we say you get the full side of Levi, and then you go from the end of Reuven and you cut it on a diagonal. So maybe you get this. But, right, again, if on the other side there are two neighbors, so he said, no, right? I'm selling you the field that's bordered by three neighbors. So then you get like that triangle, right? If he only said, right, again, if he says, I'm giving you the field that's between Levi and Reuven, it's the rectangle. If he says, I'm selling you Levi, Reuven, and Shimon, but the side of the wall on Reuven and Shimon's side is shorter, so then you get this triangle that you see here. Okay, next case. Let's say the field is bordered on four sides, right? North, south, east, west, right? But the opposite ones are owned by the same person, right? Reuven owns, right, east and west. Shimon owns north and south. So if you say, I'm selling you the property, right, again, that's owned, two sides are owned by Reuben and two sides are owned by Shimon. So then the question is, what did he sell, right? So you have to say that it's bordered on two sides by Reuven and two sides by Shimon. That will give you the whole field. But if you don't say that, if you just say it's bordered by Reuven and Shimon, so then maybe you get, right, just, right, that corner, right, because it's a field bordered by Reuven and Shimon. Maybe, and now the Gemara, wants to be a little bit more complicated, right? Maybe you just get, you just get the strip of land from corner to corner, right? Or maybe you get, right here, right? Maybe you just get, right? Again, if I say you get the field that's bordered by Reuben and Shimon. So now maybe you just get the corners. Maybe you just get these strips of land, right? Between, you see the X, right, from one side to the other, or again, maybe you just get the whole field. So what if he just described the alternating, alternating fields, right? So again, you see here we have north, south, east, and west, but different people own, right, the different borders, but not very evenly. So maybe you only get, right, maybe when he only talks about like alternating neighbors, but not all the neighbors, again, maybe you get the whole field, but maybe you only get, right, just the corners, just the strips again. Don't worry, there are more options. Right? Let's say each side is owned by two people, but instead of mentioning all 8 people, you mentioned, right? Let's say 1, 1, 2, and 3, but not 4, right? Or you mentioned every other one. So again, maybe there's the option for this like triangle pizza pie option, or again, as we said, maybe you get the whole field. The last case is, let's say, again, it's bordered by different people, but you can see that the picture on the left has the pictures on the left, the light green, the field extends beyond the yellow borders, as opposed to the picture on the right, the field goes to the edge of the border. So here, right, if it sticks out, maybe you don't get that strip that sticks out, or maybe you do, and it depends on if that strip is important, if it's valuable, if you can and if you can farm it, and that will determine if you get the rights to that land or not. Okay, that's it for our pictures. Let's say you have two partners. One partner decides to sell his half. So if he says, I'm selling you half of my land, so then you only get a quarter, right? Because he owns half, and then you get half of his half. But if he just says, I'm selling you my land, so then you get half of the land. Let's say it says on the left, it's bordered by Reuben, and on the other side, you get right half. So again, are you getting half the field, or maybe you're getting half of a half? And here the Gemara talks about the minimum amount of a field that is seen as valuable is what's called 9 kav. That's how much it can produce. So we're going to see that when we have a doubt as to what the person meant, so we have, right, I guess we can call it the maximum and the minimum, right? The minimum is always going to be this 9 kav. The maximum is whatever we think it could be. And you basically split it, right? So you take the in between those two things. So again, the Adaf 63 discusses this idea of splitting the difference, basically, and understanding when do you get the maximum and when do you get the minimum. And here, as I saw some of the comments, people are saying, right, we're so happy when people are very clear as to what they're selling, right? You can tell from this discussion that many times they were not clear, right? I'm selling you my northern field. I don't know what that means. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what the borders are. And that's really what the Gemara is trying to figure out, who gets what. A person can retain, right? We talked about retaining ownership of the roof when they sell the house. Again, that seems strange to us, but in a place where every inch of space is usable, the owner has the right to say, I'm retaining certain parts of the house, again, if they're external. And we said you can stick a beam out of the roof over the courtyard, even though you don't own the courtyard. Or no, it means that he can rebuild like the upper floor, right? If it falls down, he can rebuild it. Let's say you sold a house and you wrote, I'm selling you the whole house. It does not include a cistern that's on the property. The seller still has the right to that. And not only that, but the original owner has the right to the land under the house, meaning if the owner wanted, meaning the original owner of the building, he can build a underground basement, again, that opens up outside, because he still owns underneath the house. But if you write in your contracts, I'm selling you this land or this house to the depths of the earth and to the highest heights, then you're selling the rights to the basement and you're selling the rights to the roof. Okay, last daf 64. As we said, you have to be very explicit when you're selling something, and then we can determine what you sold and what you didn't. Okay, the last Mishnah for today. Again, if you sold a house, what is not included? The pit and the cistern are not included. And the seller has the right, let's say the seller sells the house, and we said he reserves the right to the water cistern. He now has to buy back the rights to a path to get to the cistern that he now owns, because the buyer of the house owns the, let's say the courtyard, so he has to buy it back. Or no, when the seller sold the land or the house, he retained not only the ownership to the cistern, but also a path to get there, which does make sense. We'll see what the machloket is. And let's say the opposite. Let's say the seller sells the pit, the cistern, so the buyer doesn't have, he doesn't have to buy a path to it, right? If you buy a cistern, you get a path, or maybe he does. So now the Gemara tells us, right, that what is the machloket of our Mishnah? The question is, when a person sells their property, are they doing it? In Hebrew, the term is be'ayin yafa, right, which means a good eye, but it means, are you being generous, or be'ayin ra'ah, right, meaning you're being stingy, right? So when you're buying something, when you're selling something, are you, sure, take whatever, or you like, no, I don't want to sell you my house, but I have to, so I'm going to sell you the bare minimum. So this is a very famous machloket. Rabbi Akiva says you sell it generously. Therefore, when you sell it generously, now the seller doesn't have a path to the cistern. You therefore have to buy back a path. But the sages say you sell it, I don't want to say begrudgingly, but maybe stingily, that's not a word, but you're not being very generous, and therefore, obviously, if you're keeping the cistern, you're also keeping a path to the cistern. Right, and we actually saw this before, that if you, we saw it a while ago, that if you sold trees, you have the right to the land under the tree, or maybe you do not have the rights to the land under the tree. You only get the tree, right? And this is the machloket, right? Do we go according to what the buyer wants? And obviously, the buyer wants a path, right? If he's going to buy the pit, or do we go according to what the seller wants, and you don't get the path again if he's selling just the pit? So, and then the daf finishes that the daf finishes by saying the law is that generally people sell be'ayin ra'ah, not in a generous way. And then they're like, no. The law is that people are generous. And spoiler, we're going to continue talking about this next time because it's not clear when people sell things, are they doing so generously or not? I imagine it also depends on why they're selling the things. Okay, so with that, I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. And Bezrat Hashem, we will meet next week at our regular time and day. I'm happy to open up if anybody has any questions or comments for a few minutes. Yes, Aliza.
I apologize before I say this. I can imagine how it sounds. But why is this one so easy to understand? Have I been exposed to this somehow at the college level? It just, except when you got to and I don't think even the schematics of the different fields, I didn't think that was beyond our reach. In relatively speaking, this one's not so hard. Why?
Because you're already an advanced Talmud scholar. You've been learning
Talmud
for 4.5 years.
Okay, let's change the subject now.
I will say, I just want to say, I all kidding aside, I think what's interesting when you learn Talmud, that we're bringing up, when you first start, right, we bring up so many different cases from different places, but we're already so far in that you've seen a lot of this before. So it's not necessarily so new, or the concepts have been around. So I was joking, but I was really being serious. Yes.
And another thing is when you're talking about a utilization of the water from the people above you, be careful. They're not using products that will kill everything unless you develop some kind of a filtration system with sand that will purify it.
That's already too many words. I'm not going to buy
it. Okay. Sorry, honey. Sorry.
I almost went. No, it's okay. But you're right. There's probably soap in that water because they're washing the floor.
Well, the soap won't hurt it.
Good point. Good point. Any other comments, questions?
Yes, I was. I really laughed and I was really cheering reading the section about, I mean, the sad section, the beautiful section about the devoted, pious ones saying, well, that's it then. I mean, the temple's gone, so I'm never going to eat meat, never going to drink wine, and all of that, and how it rolls out and the logic. And it's like, well, for how long? Forever. Well, just you or everyone? Everyone. No. See, you can't impose that on all the people to do that, and for a lot of good reasons. And so when it evolves, it says, and what about the bread? And what about the fruit? So, we'll just live on fruit. Oh, that's right, because we've got to bring the fruit. And then finally it's like, and what about water? And so just because, I know people, esteemed people, and I'm sure they've got their good reasons, that have the very same opinion and live today not eating meat or drinking wine for the very reason of like continuing this kind of ascetic practice. I mean, I wouldn't presume to think they haven't read through this material. They certainly know this, but for some reason, they just, it was, it's on them to go ahead and do it anyway.
Right.
But I just love that is there on the record for us, that if anyone is thinking that was the only answer, and your grieving needs to have you not do anything that we used to do in the temple, then we have this Gemara to show that wasn't actually imposed upon the people in general.
Yeah.
Exactly. Beautiful. I think it's the Gemara is really teaching us that we need to find balance. We can't go to an extreme. Obviously, we feel that it's important to mourn the temple every day, right? So by leaving a space in your house, or by, kind of muting something in our lives. But I think the Gemara is very attuned to human nature, that that's not the way the public can live. Now, again, I could say that one could say, if one person wants to do it, that's their own personal choice. But as a nation or as a community, the rabbis cannot, expect that to be accepted practice, because it's just not feasible. Another person can argue that it means nobody should do it, right? That in Judaism, we believe in being a part of this world, and we don't really ascribe to asceticism. But again, that's, I think, another conversation. But the conclusion of the Gemara is definitely that in general, that's not something that we need to do.
And portion re'eh, which I love, is all about eat your meat. They say over and over again, eat your meat wherever you have it, in whatever town, whatever, you're going to want it, eat it. Eat your meat, eat your meat. I mean, and so of course and it talks about it won't always be at the temple, that you're going to be dining on meat, and please do it and enjoy it.
Lynn, don't you think that the rabbis tried to make life easier for us, not more difficult? I do.
Yeah.
I've heard that there's a Sephardi custom of when you say the grace after meals, that you take the knives off the table, because when you get to the point of Uvnei Yerushalayim, they shouldn't self-inflict cuts on themselves. This my sister-in-law told me, so I don't know.
Interesting.
This is the true basis, but they take the knives off the table so that it's not available.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Well, it says for us a Torah of life, and it says in more than one place that we should not mourn overly. We should live.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
The Torah tells us v'chai bahem. We have to live by the mitzvot, by the Torah, and not suffer too much. Yeah.
No, that's why you have 730 in the year, but most people don't ever make it through the year. At least the ones I know.
What?
When you're mourning a death, there's 7 days, 30
7
days,
days,
and
30
the
days.
whole year, but most
Yes,
people
yes.
don't make it the
Yes.
whole year.
Correct. 7. I thought you meant like 7:30. I'm like, what happens at 7:30?
Oh, I don't know. I'm sorry.
No, it's very difficult. I mean, I'm going through it now. It's very difficult for a whole year. As a matter of fact, when my father passed away, this is a leap year, so it's 13 months. But
Really?
I heard Abu Tafi saying that the first year that you do the yahrzeit at 12 months, and not necessarily on the date. In other words, my father passed away on the 12th of Tevet, so it'll be on the 12th of Kislev because it was a leap year and then we had an extra month. But it'll be on the 12th, the day of, but every subsequent year will be on the exact date. So
Wow.
it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
Wow. Wow.
Shalom.
All right. Well, wishing everyone a Shavua Tov, a Shabbat Shalom, and may we see the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash very, very
Amen.
soon.
Thank
Amen.
you. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen.
Okay.
Man, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Sorry for your-
Shalom.
Take care,
Shabbat
everybody.
shalom.
Take care. Bye-bye.